if you know that can't make it today, then you can share the recording. We'll share that on LinkedIn and on the WomenEd website as well. So thank you so much for joining. Got 15 participants already. If anyone is joining us, please, can you write your name, where you're from in the chat? It's a great way for us to connect with people, maybe if they're in our region or maybe just across MENA. So please just write your name, where you're joining us from, and your position. If you'd like to add that too. Hi. Excellent. Thank you. Lovely to meet so many people. We've got Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Dubai, Qatar. Joining from Germany. Lovely. Even beyond MENA. Amazing. So we'll make a start. So just to introduce myself, if you don't know me already, my name's Esther Mistami Daniels. I'm currently based in Muscat in Oman, working at the British School. I am a MENA lead, region lead for WomenEd, along with Nalini, who's joining us as well. And we're going to start off. We're very excited to meet G, who's joining us from the UK. So G is, let me make sure I've got this all right, G. You're an award-winning independent international education consultant, 25 years of experience in education, including executive leadership, director of education and math, head teacher, and you can add Executive Leader of the Year award, came second in the Muslim Teacher Awards in the UK recently. So amazing achievements.
That's such a great introduction. Thank you so much. I'm
I'm really
delighted
excited
to
to
be
see.
here and thank you for having me. I'm so excited and honored to be part of this webinar for Women's Ed and have the opportunity to share my experiences with this brilliant group of women.
Okay, so we're going to kick off with G really telling us about her journey. If you have any questions along the way, please post them in the chat. This is an opportunity for us to share our experiences, learn from each other, and be inspired, I guess, by each other's journey, some of our setbacks, some of our challenges, some of our trials and tribulations, and why that might affect us, but more importantly, how we can get over this. And one thing that I really admire, respect about G's approach is that it's not a victim mentality. This is how we can get over our barriers and move forward and really get ahead and support each other as women of color, and other women of color in our organizations or across our paths, and how we can support each other through that. So, G, I know you've had quite a journey. So I
Uh-huh.
think so it'd be great to share sort of where you started and your journey along the way.
Right, thank you so much. I'm hoping that you'll hear a very honest and reflective session. And it's part of my sort of real lived experience that I've had to navigate throughout my whole kind of leadership process that I've been through as a Muslim Asian woman. Everything from being underestimated to sidelined to challenging the bias and basically negotiating my own value and also kind of like facing my imposter syndrome and confronting that. And like you said, it's not about being a victim. It's about developing your power, your credibility, your courage, and I suppose sharing with you how I survived those leadership spaces and tried to reshape that narrative as well. So I think I'm going to start my journey. I've kind of done it in a bit of a chronological order where I start off as a NQT and how I moved up the ladder and all the challenges I faced at each stage of my journey. And there were different challenges. Sometimes there was an overlap, but there were different challenges at different stages. So I started off as an NQT and I decided to go for head of faculty quite early on in my career. I had no intentions of going for a promotion. I'd barely been in the job for a year. I wasn't after the title, I wasn't after the money. I just believed in the children. But then I found out who was actually applying, a white male, and he did not believe in the children that we were serving. And I just thought, well, I'm not going to be an NQT and an early careers teacher underneath this person because I had no respect for the person for various reasons, including being quite sort of racist against Muslim children. And, I'd found that out quite early on when he mistook me for being a Sikh woman. And he said, "Oh, I think you and I have got something in common and we both hate Muslims." And I was just like really taken aback. He had it worked out as Muslim, and the school was 90% Muslim. So I just thought to myself, you know what? You don't deserve to be head of department. So I just thought, let's just go for it. And I put myself forward and I got the job. And at that time, the head teacher was an Asian Muslim woman, and she's bought into the vision. And and it was really rare back in the day. It is rare now having Muslim head teachers, but it was even rarer at that time. But I represented the children, and that's what they realized. I represented children that I was serving, disadvantaged background, poor, EAL, and coming from a family that was uneducated, so I could relate to the children that I was actually serving. And I just thought, okay, I got the job. It was quite relatively easy getting the job, to be honest. I was shocked, but I got it. But then the problem started. My first challenge was about being underestimated by my peers. So I had these other middle leaders, and I was not fitting the mental picture. Basically, I didn't represent the mental picture of a leader that they had in their own head. So I was young, I was a Muslim woman, I was inexperienced for sure. I was an Asian woman where all my other peers were white, male, and female. And we were leading a school in really high state context where the results hadn't been great, and there was lots of challenges and barriers. And back in the day, you didn't have all of these courses in, and now you have middle leadership courses and NPQs, and none of that was there. Everything was relying upon the experience, and I didn't have that. And no one was there to like try and help me to kind of navigate my journey. And I started to become really underestimated. So you turn up to the meetings and they'd be quite sort of dismissive of me, like, you're just like young little girl, what do you know what you're talking about? And the way I kind of like overcame that was being prepared, and that preparation started to become my armor. I started to understand the personalities and behaviors in that team. I started to notice who makes eye contact, who did they echo, who did they ignore, and just watched and analyzed the different personalities. And I started to gain a wealth of information about their own insecurities of the leaders around me. And I started to kind of plan and prepare my delivery, knowing the characters that I was going to be, working with, and really knowing my audience. So when I started to go into middle leaders meetings, then what happened was I started to play a little bit of a chess game in there in my head, and started to predict and preempt from their previous behaviors as to who's going to come out with what barrier, who's going to come out with what challenge with my suggestions, and started to predict the questions and started to think through in advance the sort of responses I was going to have, so I wasn't on the back foot. And that really started to pay dividends, and started to like come to the point where the department, they could see that was going from strength to strength. So I was in charge of science department at the time, and it went from being the lowest performing department to becoming the highest performing department, and became well above national average. So the middle leaders now started to sit up and take me seriously, because within 1 year, the actions that I'd put together had actually had an impact. So it started to become really clear to them that actually this little Indian girl is actually not to be messed with, because I'm showing an impact which they weren't. It was the same school, same children, But what I was doing was making a difference whilst their department results were still staying quite low down. And that started to get me the respect that I needed. But the navigation in the actual meetings was all about knowing the characters and building those relationships with people and understanding that different people were, ticking in a different way. And that then helped me to have those one-to-one relationships that I built up. And then it was a case of my own impact having given me that credibility. And what I learned, I suppose, was like not to argue your worth, but it's all about demonstrating your worth. It was about backing it up with evidence. It was backing it up with impact, so that what you had to say ended up becoming indisputable. And over time, what started off as them underestimating me, actually meant that they were coming to me for advice, and the table started to turn. And I realized then that actually, you know what? I have to write my own story before people write it for me. And them trying to dismiss me and underestimate me. And if you got to remember that I was very, very young, so I could have easily just gone into my little corner and thought, you know what? I'm just going to kind of shy away, and oh, they must know more than me. And they've been here for ages, and they've been head of department for 10, 15 years. But you know what? I stood back and thought, actually, what is the impact of you on the results? Your department is still doing really badly. So I don't think you can tell me how to do my job. I've come up with fresh ideas. And instead of like going on about it, I just started putting them into action and letting the outcomes actually speak for themselves. And that really, really helped.
No, that's really powerful, G. I did want to ask, because I think a lot of us have similar strategies, but we can at some points burn out or feel like the efforts are futile and you're not seeing the results, or not necessarily, even though you're trying, you're backing it up with your evidence and you're really trying to push against there. Was there a point when you did feel that fatigue? Or if you didn't, what kind of advice can you give to someone who's starting to feel that, where they're doing all of that, but they're still coming up against barriers that are not getting them recognized in the way that you fortunately were?
Right. So first of all, I kept the children at the center of what I was doing, thinking, right, what am I doing this for? I was serving a really, really disadvantaged community, and, I owed it to them. So that was a real motivator, a real driver. And if people are doing that and they are really trying to build those relationships, they are trying to work out their characters. And, people think that they do, but they don't actually act upon it. So they might be analyzing the character. They sort of think that they're doing it, but they're not actually doing it. It was actually quite hard work. And if it doesn't work, then basically leave. Because if you're not being recognized through the impact, now my impact was indisputable. The results had gone up in 1 year. We went from 17% A star to C to 51% A star to C in 1 year. So they had no choice but to look at what on earth is she doing with the same children and with the same sort of like structures and processes. And if you're having that kind of impact and they can't see you for your impact, then you don't belong there. For me, it's just like, well, don't work yourself to the bone for them. Go and find somewhere else that do actually take you seriously.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow, but it is truth, and it's an important fact to remember. Um, Amazing. Has anyone got any questions? You've got some amazing comments. You're really inspiring, giving you
You know
motivation.
what? I can't see anyone. I can't even see
Oh,
you. It'd be good to see you actually on here. I can see my own slide, but I think everybody's seen the slide. So it'd be good to see your face, Esther.
oh, okay, sure. Let me stop sharing and you can have a look.
Because otherwise I'm just feeling as if I'm talking to myself. Ah, that's better.
Yeah, sorry. So has anyone got any questions for G that they'd like to ask her? Anyone's got similar experiences or any advice that you'd like to ask her for in relation to being recognized? Anyone facing any similar? You're welcome to unmute yourself and share, or have any questions for G.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Afreen
Hi.
here.
Hi there.
I'm Afreen from UAE. So this I mean, Gee, the story, I mean, the thing that you've been experiencing, I'm actually living through it currently. And believe me, like I have been sidelined many a times, not being promoted as a VP or any position for that matter. I mean, I've been working here in UAE for almost 11 years now as a head of academics for K-12, then in a British curriculum school as a head of secondary and sixth form for 2 years. And just because my husband got transferred, I had to move back to Abu Dhabi. And then I'm working in, I worked in edX charter schools for 2 years till date now as a head of school. The thing is, like, whenever we have asked for any questions to your line managers, because my reporting line manager is the principal, of course. If I have ever asked a question to get clarification, it was taken as a threat or an insecurity kind of a thing. And then, things do not go well when you keep asking questions because you need clarity. If you are
Yeah.
in a position and you're answerable to your teammates and they look up to you to get those answers, so I'm not the sole person. I'm not the principal to take a decision directly for the whole school. That's where I approached the principal, and the responses that we get, we aren't clear, so we don't give clarity to our teammates, and that's where the rift, the thing becomes quite evident, that there is a rift between the principal and the head of school, and something like that. And that's where I had to walk away. So I chose peace, to be honest,
Yeah. And you know
because
what? That's a really brave move to make.
yeah.
And as I go through the journey, sometimes, and I've had to walk away as well, and sometimes walking away is the best thing that you can do because there's only so much you can do with internal politics. And you can't have that as part of your problem when it's a political problem or whatever it is inside the actual establishment. So, good for you for actually being brave enough to walk away.
Yes.
But that's actually, causing an impact on our career, because when you interview for a position in other schools, people question you like, why have you changed your job, like within just less than 2 years you changed your job, why are you looking out for a job again? But we cannot actually talk negatively about any organization, but it is we who know what we have been going through, and that's the reason that we have chosen to walk away, and that we are
Yeah.
looking for a new job. That's quite challenging, so it has another face to it, to be honest.
And I suppose there's a balance to be struck there between being blatantly honest and talking about, moving into a place where your visions and values align, rather than being in a position where they don't. So I would turn it around to the fact that I'm applying to you because where I'm applying actually chimes with what I believe in. If I sort of can continue, Esther, into my next
Yes,
sort of phase.
absolutely. We've got a few questions I can hold fire. We've got a few, if I can just go on with those. So one's asking, did you have any critical friends to help at any stage in your journey?
At that time, no. So when I was this early on in my career, there was no critical friend because I was surrounded by a lot of incompetence, if I was honest with you. And it was about self-survival mode. Later on, in my journey, I did pick up some mentors and some coaches and started to really use them to help me navigate some of the difficulties that I faced in my career. But back then, it was just me, myself, and I, and just having to learn from experiences, learning from, you know, um, people's reactions, people's behaviors, and really getting to know them as characters. And people watching is actually quite powerful, I have found.
I'm going to ask you a little bit more about this later on. One more question about how do you have any advice as to women can navigate cultural element of sexism within? So I think you touched on it a little bit in terms of the culture of the establishment, but any kind of advice for people that might be feeling that head on? that level of
in
sexism.
terms of sexism.
Yeah.
That comes up later on. So if we hold fire on that,
All right.
hopefully
Okay. Go
that
for it.
question will get answered.
Okay.
So now I've been the head of department for 5 years, and we've had a really great offset inspection. We've got outstanding. I was recognised for my leadership and management. I've taken the department from being the lowest performing department in Leicester to being one of the highest performing departments in Leicester. And I just thought, you know what, it's time for me to apply for a job now. And it's time for me to look for my next promotion, which was to be an assistant principal. And so I remember my inspection finishing on a Thursday, and I decided that I wanted to apply for a role on Friday, which I had just seen pop up. And I just thought, I'm going to actually capitalize on the fact that I've just bagged, an outstanding judgment. And many women don't do that. I think what happens is that they will have done all this graft, they would have done all this hard work, they might have turned it around, but instead of capitalizing on the moment, they kind of wait, and I don't know what they're waiting for. So I just thought, you know what, I've achieved this. Whilst it's hot off the press, let me just go for it rather than waiting for it to then become stale and waiting for something miraculous to happen before I go for an assistant principal role. So I said to my head, I said, something's come up in a local school, assistant principal, and I want that job, so I'm going to be applying for it. And she absolutely said, no way, because you're not applying for it. She goes, I'll give you the assistant principal role in this school. So this is still the same Asian Muslim female who's the head teacher of this school. And she said, I don't want to lose you. You've done so much here in turning around the department. You've demonstrated impact. You deserve to be an assistant principal. And I just thought, oh, happy days, no interview, no competition, just a proven track record got me into the job. So I thought this is going to be great, being a assistant principal, except for things changed very, very quickly because she retired. So when she retired, it brings me to my second challenge, which was power games. Because now what I had was a male dominated senior leadership team. So you had a white male dominated senior leadership team is serving a school that was 95% Asian Muslim. Now, my identity and my background reflected the students, but the power structures around me, they didn't. So there was a tension there all the time that started to shape my own leadership. And what I found was the senior leaders were quite, they were challenged, but not directly. It was all kind of like quiet. So things like these are sorts of things that would show up for me. And I think people will recognize this. So we just heard from Ashrin about being passed over for promotion. I've been doing the job for AP and, time came for VP, but, I was not even on their radar, even though I had a proven track record, receiving little or no credit for my contributions. And worse still, other people, the white men around me taking credit for my work that I had led. There was an attempt to actually discredit my professionalism at one point. You would not believe this, the extent to these very, I suppose, insecure men who felt, I think, threatened by me. So I had two vice principals. I was an assistant principal, and I was having impact. And I was gaining a lot of credibility with teachers and middle leaders. And they were being, kind of like noticed for being a little bit of a blagger. So instead of thinking about the children and the impact of having the children and celebrating that, one of the vice principals decided to bring into question my professionalism and actually lied about me playing Candy Crush or whatever it was on the phones. I've never even heard of it. Yeah. So they turned around and said, oh, in the middle of the training meeting, G was playing Candy Crush on her iPad. I was absolutely aghast. I was like, what? And I couldn't believe it, thinking, you know what? You can't get me for my professional work. So you're now trying to get me for, my credibility. And I really absolutely kicked off because I said, right, I'm not having that. And I went to my head And my head goes, I said, look, this is what one of your vice principals have said, and I want a full investigation. Check my iPad, check everything. It's like bringing me into disrepute. And I've worked so hard, building up my reputation. He wouldn't have it. He goes, oh, gee, oh no, you didn't do it, so don't worry about it. He's just being like this. He didn't want to hold him to account. Did not want to hold him to account. I had to really, really dig my heels in. Say, no, I want an absolute apology. And these are sorts of games that were being played in the background to try and bring you down. So what I learned was to try and like think about the power games that were going to happen, think about how they were going to be played out in meetings, not letting men talk over me. And that's actually quite difficult, because when you've got so many around you and they're talking over you and they are not showing that respect, to turn around and say, well, actually, no, you're not going to do that. I'm making my point. And can you stop and wait for me to finish my sentence before you jump in? It's so much easier saying it here compared to when you're in there. And I was literally rehearsing that. And what made it really difficult was my dad, who had moved to England in the 1960s, had shared so many stories about racism. They had put it into my head that don't raise your head above the parapet, because you do, you're going to be at the threat of losing your job. So just be subservient to the white boss. So you had that in your head all the time, so that made you sort of be scared about speaking up, because you were kind of taught to say nothing, put up and shut up. And that was baggage that I was carrying. But I just knew that I couldn't do that. So I became very highly visible. And I made sure that staff, students, parents, they could see me leading from the front. I took every opportunity to lead on presentations. I just put myself out my comfort zone. I was like creating that consistency and momentum about my reputation, and basically getting people to talk about me behind my back positively. So it helped to the other leaders to like recognize me, even though they didn't want to, because the crowd around me was recognizing me. So they would start to look quite stupid if they started to say negative things about me. And we've got to remember that we're not actually operating in a fair system. When people talk about like being, full of humility and, blah, blah, blah. And, it doesn't actually work if you're not operating in a fair system. And because we're not, we have to bring attention to our own work and take credit. And women find that so difficult to do. To take credit for their own work. So you're not doing it arrogantly, but you're being strategic about it. And I just thought to myself, I'm going to try and take control over the power games that were being, sort of playing out around me by actually being really strategically assertive. And that took a lot of time and effort. And I suppose the other thing was not to internalize what they were trying to do and not be threatened by their power. And actually let your capability and your credibility start to talk for itself. So I really learned not to actually take it personally, and being twice as prepared. I was always going in really super prepared, because I couldn't afford to be average on my best day. But what happened was, as I started to be really prepared, it made me be more kind of skilled. I had more knowledge that was helping to improve my credibility. And it started to really forge competence in a way that they wouldn't, because they had the white privilege. So that was what was carrying them. Whilst with me, the reading, the researching, the collaboration with other people, being outward facing, learning from others, that all meant I was building up my depth of knowledge. And as I was building up that depth of knowledge, I was developing expertise. So what started off as being like, I'm going to have to work twice as hard, instead of moaning about it, I just thought, you know what? It's not a fair system. I'm not going to be a victim. What can I do about it? And actually, that ended up becoming my armor. So the men were being like, realized for being blaggers, whilst people were looking at me thinking, actually, you know what? She really knows what she's talking about. So that's what then ended up helping me to develop myself as a senior leader. And then slowly, the men around me started to see that actually she is got so much to offer, and we're going to have to really sit on and listen because parents, teachers, and students had actually now seen my worth. And although they didn't like it, their power game started to kind of diminish. And then, one of them I noticed was a bit of a narcissist. So again, a narcissistic boss can be like quite toxic, as we know. So when I started to realize through sort of people watching and their behaviors that I've got a narcissistic boss, I actually researched about narcissistic bosses, right? Thinking, right, I'm stuck here. This is where I am. I'm loving the school. How do you behave in a narcissistic boss? What do you do? What don't you do? What makes them tick? What doesn't make them tick? How am I going to turn this around to my advantage? And how am I not going to get caught up in their behaviors? Because it's a you problem. It's not, I'm not going to make it into a me problem, simple as. So even something like that, you can do something about it because you will have all sorts of weird and wonderful leaders around you. And I suppose my golden rule is to try and work out who on earth you're working with and then use that personality to your advantage. I'm just going to pause there.
I was going to say you touched on so many things. It's like tick, tick, tick. I think what's really standing out is like you've got an inner voice, which is like, from our parents, our heritage. And I think that really resonates with me, this idea of being this good immigrant and basically keeping your head down. Don't rock the boat too much because you just should be thankful that you're there versus I'm here, I will be heard, and you're not going to sideline me and you're not going to, challenge, make out that I'm not doing what I'm doing. And what I love and what stands out so profoundly for me is that yes, this is the situation. Yes, I'm aware of it. What can I do to get over it? It's not sitting there, and
Yeah.
I think that's really hard. I think a lot of it because it can be hard. Essentially, it can be really difficult to sit there and feel that you're constantly undermined or you're constantly having to challenge. The battle is weary. So I think that whole, and I just love that, I worked out who my boss was like, and I'm going to work out what makes them tick and how I can get over that. I think that's super powerful. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, saying if you're not respected, you don't belong there. But I think in the international, in particular, particularly for some women, you've got your kids are in your school. It's not as easy to move countries. For example, it is in the UK, we don't have as many schools. So I think it's how can we navigate that? How can we work out what our values are, what our limits are, what our capabilities are in terms of, where we draw the line. But then more importantly, what can we do to get through that and get over that? And I think your message is really powerful.
And at the moment, I've started to use all my experience to try and coach other women, and be mentors for them through, lots of like different avenues through charities. And when they are, there's two in particular, when I first met them, they were like really unhappy in their workplace. So we really try to distill why is it that you're unhappy? And we talked about their bosses and how they're being treated, blah, blah, blah. But when I got them to switch the narrative to, okay, let's try and recognize, because if we could just recognize what you're working with, they will all have their strengths, they will all have their areas of development, and they will all have like certain points which are their weaknesses. And if we can identify that, you can build up a relationship knowing those characters and actually turning it around so that you can work with that personality that you've got, and that takes that, time and effort. And both of them actually turned it around and they've recognized who they're working with. They know how to kind of like not massage the ego. I wouldn't say that. It's not about massaging. It's about like really trying to work out what makes them tick and what are they going to value, and then you providing that value for them. And suddenly, with both of them, they have started to become noticed. They started to become recognized. They're feeling more valued, and they're feeling a lot happier in the workplace. And it was just like, let's just stop moaning about it because I think we can do something about it.
I think
So
the idea that we have to work hard or be more prepared, and I think, and that's a point that you sort of really stood out for me as well. That's a positive thing. We can see that as a burden, but actually that makes us better and sharper in our craft to actually, work with whatever we need to work with. So that's a positive. And I think switching the narrative is such a simple but such a powerful way to look at things. Not always easy, but really important.
no. And you know what? All of that hard work is paying dividends now as an independent international consultant because I've got so much in my head and I've read so much and I have put myself out there. And all of that experience is now paying dividends where people, when they, bring me in, the clients return again and again and again. And so all of that graft that I had to do in order to build my credibility and to prove myself, yes, I had to work 10 times harder than a bloke, and it's not a fair system. Not at all, but it is what it is at the moment, and we can keep bashing away at it. And not all men are like that. Some men, have been absolutely fantastic. But, when you're working in that system, it's just like, okay, how can I just turn this into a positive? What am I going to get out of it in order to sort of like move myself forward? I suppose, my third challenge I put down here is my imposter syndrome. So, I'd been an assistant principal now for a few years. I had, managed to, get that proven track record. I'd like done so much now on a whole school level. And I just thought, okay, it's time for me to apply for a vice principal role. And it was so much harder than I thought it was going to be for two reasons. One, I was applying and I think I'd applied for 5 roles across 6 years as a vice principal, right? And I just wasn't breaking in. And I'm thinking, I've got a proven track record, I've got like results, I've got outcomes, I've got impact. Why am I not breaking through this? And two things sort of come into play. One, the rejections ended up amplifying your imposter syndrome because the more you got rejected, the more you thought, maybe they're right, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I don't belong. Maybe I'm not ready for vice principal, and all of that was going through your head and your imposter syndrome was getting louder and louder. And I just thought to myself, this is like doing my nutting. So what am I going to do about it? So I decided to do a 360. So, when you do those, what do you call it? There's questionnaires and you send it out to people that people that you kind of like worked with, and you get them to kind of analyze you. And I still got them to this day, actually, those 360s. And I did that because what I wanted to do was trying to really figure out what am I good at from another person's perspective and what do I need to kind of like still work on. And human beings, I don't know what it is with us, and especially women, when somebody is telling you that you're really good at X and you're really good at, you're like, no, 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 oh, no, 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 you just, you don't sit and listen to when somebody is telling you. Your first reaction is to like, kind of like turn around and say, oh no, but you're so much better than I am. And oh no, team effort. And yeah, there's a time and a place for that. Whilst men, you tell them like, you've done something good, even like, some men just think they've done something good and they just pat themselves on the back, even when nobody's actually telling them they've done anything good, but in their little heads that they have done something brilliant. I really took the 360s and I really made a conscious effort of reminding myself of the positives that other people saw in me and really try to listen to that rather than dismissing those positive comments and really believing in them. So that really helped to like dampen down the imposter syndrome. And then when I took a closer look at the jobs that I hadn't got, one really stuck out for me. So sometimes we're internal candidates and they were just like advertising outside, but they had no intentions of, recruiting anybody from outside, but they were just doing it for the legal boxes. So, but there was one particular one where it was externally advertised, and then they got the job. Now I knew 2 weeks beforehand they had had an Ofsted inspection, and the person who got the job, because of them, that section of the Ofsted report was actually downgraded, but they still managed to get the vice principal job. But when you had a look at who got the vice principal job and who was the head teacher who was actually doing the interview, I had a white, pudgy, bald, grey man, and he recruited a white, pudgy, bald, grey man. They were literally identical clones of each other. And then you started to look at, well, actually, why am I going to let this feed my imposter syndrome? Because there's affinity bias, there's similarity bias, there is that unconscious tendency to favor the people who have similar traits as yourself. So is it a me problem or is it a them problem? So I'll try to dampen down that syndrome by reminding myself that these things exist. Now, what happened was that at one point, the whole affinity bias actually ended up working in my favor. So if you remember when I got the NQT to head of department role, it was an Asian woman who recruited me. And then a job came up and I just thought, I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. It was a secondment, and I actually got the job. Now, interestingly, it was two females, one white female, one Asian female, and I got the vice principal job. And just thought to myself, if you have a look at the pattern, or when I got my first major promotion and the assistant principal promotion, it was an Asian female. When I got my second one from assistant principal to vice principal, it was an Asian female and a white lady who then became my mentor and coach, who is still my rock to this day. Amazing, amazing CEO. So during that time when I was going through the rejections, I had two choices, right? I either, after 6 years, you got to remember, 6 years is a long time to try and break into the vice principal bracket, that I could just resign myself and be a cynic and, not be positive. But I thought to myself, you know what? Every one of those rejections, I was trying to turn it around in order to build my competence, build my skill, build my knowledge, and build my skill set. So I went to my head teacher saying, look, I've been doing this role and these have been my responsibilities. Now I want to switch responsibility. The next rejection, I said, I want to switch my responsibility. So I started to get a breadth of experience. So instead of just doing, for example, teaching and learning, or, I don't know, whatever, quality of education. What I started to do was I say, right, I'm going to now try some pastoral work. I'm now going to try this. I'm going to try. So I went through looking at developing IT across the system. I did specialist college. I did data and data and the use of data to drive school improvement. I went through lots and lots of things, so I didn't get stale. So even though I was rejected, I just thought, what can I do to improve my skill and my knowledge set? And that's what I did to make me even better for the next time, make me even better for the next time. I went and became an inspector. So all of those rejections, I turned them into, okay, I've actually got some time to develop my skill and my competence. What am I going to do? Because I'm not going to moan about it. I'm not going to go into despair. I'm not going to give up. So I just sort of turned it around on its head.
Amazing. Because I think there is a when you get rejected so many times, the imposter syndrome, like you said, sets in, and you're just like, maybe this just isn't the right path for me. Maybe I need to change. But utilizing that and saying, what can I do to move forward? What was the feedback like in terms of were you getting constructive and supportive feedback from those rejections, or were you speaking to mentors and coaches to support that? Like in terms of people that are trying to move ahead, if they're struggling to get the feedback that they're finding helpful, what kind of advice can you give in terms of other areas that they can get that from? I know the 360s are really good, but in terms of the professional feedback.
So, when you went for a job, I always ask for feedback. So every time I got rejected, I, didn't want a little tokenistic, you're so close and blah, blah, blah. No, I insisted that if I've given up 2 days of my life to come to your school to have an interview, and God knows how many hours and weeks have gone into the preparation for that interview, I deserve to have time with you so you can actually dissect my interview and tell me why I didn't get the job. That's the least you can do. So I was really quite pushy in trying to get feedback. Some of that feedback was useful, and the last sort of feedback I got was the most useful that I got. And he sat down and he went through every single interview that I had done in terms of every single panel interview over the 2 days. And he said there was no doubt in my mind that you could not do the job in terms of technical skill and knowledge. But what we didn't see from you is your personality was so polished, you were so professional that we didn't actually see the real G. And I was really struck by that, thinking, oh, right, okay. And because you just seemed to be too over prepared, basically. And we couldn't really get to the bottom of like who is the real Jill. We know she can do the job, she'll smash it, but we actually wanted more of a personality. And I really took that on board. So when I went for my next one, I went against my kind of like go-to personality, which is to be over-prepared. And I just thought, you know what, let's just speak from the head and the heart, do a little bit of research on the school, and let's just see what happens on the day. And I got my dream job. And I looked back and I thought to myself, if I had lined up all those five schools that had rejected me, and I was like thinking, right, you've got the choice of all of them now, which one would you choose? It would be the last one, because Russia Mead, where eventually I became the head teacher, that was one of the schools with the best reputation. It was a school that I used to turn to go and get some help and learn from them and bounce ideas with them. To for me to get that vice principal job, it was like the best school that I could have gone into, and it just took that patience to kind of get there and really listen to the feedback that I got back and apply that. So, you know, if you are going for jobs and stuff, I would strongly advise you to really push your way, and don't just, because sometimes what happens, you ask for feedback and they just ignore your email. Well, actually, you know, ask them again. And for one of them, I actually turned up at the school saying, "Oh, my email seemed to be bouncing. So I've just turned up, you know, would it be possible to see the head?" You know, it was one of her candidates and I'm looking for some feedback. Thank you very much.
I love that.
Well, if you're going to
Absolutely.
ignore my emails, then you know what I mean? You know, you can like, put some time and effort into me.
Right, it's completely true. And I think advocating for yourself and fighting for yourself, I think that's something that we could probably all do with a little bit of reminder of doing. So yeah, absolutely. Right. Do we have any questions or any comments we'd like to share with G? Anyone want to unmute and say something? Don't all be shy. You can unmute and put your hand up and say something.
Well, I've
Leave some
got my
comments.
fourth challenge was to think like a man.
Yes, we have got that. We've got one
Is
here. We've
it
got
okay if I?
Sanam. Would you like to? Oh, sorry. I've called someone out. Sorry, Sanam, do you
Um,
want to put your hand up?
Yeah, sure. Hi, G. Thank you so much for the talk. It's so interesting to hear from you. So earlier on, you talked about representation and you used a beautiful phrase. You said representing children I was serving. I love that sort of server mindset. Can you talk to me a bit more or talk to us a bit more about what that representation is like now? You talked about your father coming in the 60s and everything that was going on there. You've talked about your own experience. Given the geopolitical situation and everything else that's going on in the UK, how is that space for Muslim teachers being trained? And then what happens to their career if and when they do enter the teaching profession? I'm quite interested to know where things are now in the UK.
I think things have become a lot better. There's a lot of organizations which I didn't know existed, shamefully, actually. So things like Muslim Teacher Association, things like the Need Trust. I've come across all of these whilst I've become a consultant. And what was beautiful was on Saturday, the award that Esther was embarrassing me with. I was in there, and in that hall, my takeaway was to step back and look at about 500 Muslim people in that room doing some fantastic things. I was just, you know, I was so inspired by listening to like what they have been doing and the way they have navigated the barriers to the leadership that they have managed to get into. And there's a real momentum and there's a real voice that's now developing over the last few years. And that voice is becoming louder and louder. And in UK, people are realizing that actually the Muslim teachers are contributing so much to the British education system. And we have got some brilliant white counterparts who are absolutely flying our flag. So there were people there at the award ceremony, you know, keynote speakers. I'm going to a racial equality network dinner tonight, you know, and they will be there. These are people who are, you know, at the top of their own careers, you know, as white British people, absolutely seeing and understanding what people from ethnic minorities are bringing to the education world. So our voice is definitely getting louder in a way that it was not the case when I started my career 25 years ago.
Thank you for that, G. We had someone else that was speaking up, but I think we might have cut them off by accident. Anyone else wanted to share?
Hello, hi.
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 Hi, how are you? I
All
just
right,
wanted
thank you.
to just say what an amazing session to be involved in.
Oh,
Truly
thank you.
motivating, and I think this is something that's what I needed. I was in KSA for the last 20 years. I've just come back to England recently. Many things I could resonate with, and it is all about just keeping at it, but very motivational, and you're doing an amazing job, and that's all I would like to say. Thank you so much for letting us have
Oh,
this
thank
platform.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Anna. That's really very kind of
yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
thank you so much.
I
Esther,
know.
shall I tell them about my full challenge about thinking
Yes,
like
please. I
a
was going to
man?
say, talk us about thinking like a man. Yes.
Thinking like a man. This is my fourth challenge, which is one of my favorite ones, actually. So, what happened was I was doing my role as a vice principal, right? And I had been in charge of writing the vision and opening up a free school, right? And I had sat all the DFE interviews. I was leading on the educational side of this, and the kind of like expectation was that I was going to end up applying for the job for the headship of this school that I had been, working on and opening in my trust. Now, it came to a point where the vice principal, the headship job, when it was about to come up, my CEO said to me, I really want to go through your vision, as to what that's going to look like in practice. And what we quickly realized is when I narrated my vision, it wasn't in alignment to what my CEO was expecting, which is fine. I just thought, you know what, if I can't open up a free school with my own vision, then I'd rather not apply for the job. So very politely, I emailed her in the Easter holidays and I said, I've had a good think about it and I'm not going to apply for the headship role. And I think people were like really, really shocked because I've been working on this project for 2 years. And, when I'd come out from the DFE interview, I remember, my trustee, the chair trustee said, well, I think we know, like, who's going to be going for that headship, G, wink, wink type of thing. So when I stepped away from it, I think they were just like really taken aback. And I just thought my values are too important to me, and I have to stay true to myself. So I didn't go for it. Anyway, the word got out that the free school is going to open. This is big news in Leicester. G's stepped away from it. So this rival trust ended up contacting me and said, can I have coffee with you? And I just thought, well, this is a bit odd, wanting to have a coffee with me. And I thought, oh, okay, this could be quite interesting. Now, there was an old G and then there's a new G in this moment, right? The old G would have said, no, 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 I'm really happy where I am. I would have been emotionally attached to the school. It was Russian Mead, and I was really happy there. I was being treated very, very well. I would have shown loyalty, and I would have actually dismissed the opportunity to have this coffee with a rival CEO. However, what happened was 2 weeks before that, I had watched a program by Karen Brady. And in there, she's from The Apprentice. I think she's a dame or something. But she was doing a whole program, and it's on YouTube, but she was talking about workplace inequalities and pay gap and the difference between men and women and all of that. And what I learned from watching that program was that you have got so many things going on that we need to be mindful of. So women do not negotiate. We don't have the confidence to negotiate. And she argues that women are often not good at negotiating. They will accept a job and then they will talk about the salary. Whilst a man will ask first about the salary, make sure it's nailed before they take the job on. Women will wait until they are 100% sure that they can actually go for that promotion. Whilst men, statistically, I think it's around about 40%, right? And they'll just go for it and they'll just go, you know what, I'm just going to see what happens, right? Women and the way they behave is that lack of confidence. They are really victims of putting up with it, and they just accept that, oh, they might have taken a career break, for example, for being on maternity leave, and maybe, I deserve that lower pay. So all of these things were coming through in this program, right? And she said about actually women need to think a little bit like a man, right? And women need to stop being subservient and grateful and actually be a bit more assertive and a bit more demanding. So thinking about that program, and men are less likely to be loyal as well. So thinking about that, I just thought to myself, you know what? I think we need to move into the new G version, you know? So the new G took that advice on board, and it was so timely, this program, that I thought, you know what, I'm going to go for coffee. So I told my head, I said, oh, you know, so-and-so has asked me to go for coffee. I don't think there's much in it, but I'll see what happens, you know, and go for it. Anyway, I went for coffee. And she basically said, I heard about what you did, and I heard about you didn't take it. It takes a brave person to walk away from basically a headship that was going to be given to you on a plate. So, you know, I want you to have a look at becoming a head of one of my schools instead, you know, and can you come and visit? And I said, right, okay. I said, but you're going to have to let my CEO know that you've approached me, because she's really good to me and I don't really want to go behind her back. So she said, okay, I'll email her. Now, I switched my phone off that night because my son was going to sit a chemistry exam the next day. So I thought I need to focus on him. Anyway, at 11 o'clock at night, I switched my phone back on again and it had gone ballistic. I had texts, I had emails, I had the CEO, I had the director of education, I had the principal. And basically I was summoned into the office at 7:30 in the morning and I was categorically told, you are not to make any decision until I have spoken to you. This is my CEO, right? And I just thought, right, okay. So I went to see her early doors. And she goes to me, I said, oh, I'm arranging a visit. She goes, I'll be honest with you, I don't want you to go and visit the school, but I know I can't stop you. And I said, no, I'm going to go and visit the school and see what it's like and blah, blah, blah. And then she goes, do not accept anything until you've spoken to me. And she said to me, what is it that you want? And I said that I've always wanted to be the director of this trust, or I don't mind being the head teacher, but of the flagship school, Rushmead, you know? And I said, I'll leave that with you. And I went off to go and have a look at this school. Anyway, I got summoned back in again. And they said, the job is yours, you know. And I would suggest you go for the headship first, earn your stripes before you become a director. And I said, look, I don't care which one I get. I said, but I'm not going for any interview. I'm not going through a circus. I'm not going to be jumping through hoops and having like, you know, all of this sort of stuff. I said, it's take it or leave it. You know, if you want me, then you're going to have to recruit me the way, you know, it is. So I walked in as a vice principal and I walked out as a head teacher. And it was just absolutely mental. But that was because I tried to think like a man. I just thought, you know, what would a bloke do? And I just thought, you know what? The loyalty has got to be mutual. Women tend to be really, really loyal, but it's not always mutually beneficial. You know, and sometimes that ends up like, you know, people taking a piss, people taking a rip. So I was being so good at not swearing as well. So, you know, really like making sure that you negotiate your pay, your, you know, your worth, you know, all of that, you know, and actually, was I even thinking of being a head teacher in that moment in time? Was I ready? No. You know, and I had an excitement for about 30 seconds. And then after that, I was just like, oh my God, oh my God. And I remember Ramzan had just started. It was the first day of Ramzan. It was hot summer. I stood in the middle. It was a Friday afternoon. I stood in the middle of this playground, and it's a school that's around about, you know, 1,800 students. It's massive. And I looked around all the buildings in the silence. And I thought, oh my days, like what on earth? I've just become a head teacher, you know. And then one of the vice principals was retiring, was walking up to me, goes, how do you feel? I said, I'm in actually a moment of panic. I'm just like flipping, I'm going to be responsible for over 200 staff, almost 2,000 students. And I'm like, what the hell have I done, you know? And he said to me, you know what, just take one day at a time and use a bit of common sense, so you're going to be all right. And you know what? I actually held on to that piece of advice. Stop having a blooming panic. You know, you've got enough behind you to be able to do some really good stuff. So, you know, I suppose my message there is don't let loyalty cost you your future. That's the real key thing. And actually, you know, sometimes, the most powerful move that you can make as a woman is actually explore different opportunities, and like really making sure that people understand that you're not just going to be staying put and putting up. If you don't understand my value and my worth, and you have shown impact, then, and you deserve to be recognized, then actually look for opportunities and let people know that you're looking for opportunities, because that can sometimes be your most powerful move. And stop being grateful, for everything, start negotiating, have clarity, have courage, and let the power dynamic shift towards you. But you've got to like orchestrate that to make that actually happen. But all of this is really dependent upon, have you got and shown impact? Because there's the other side of this where I talk to leaders and they go, oh, I'm not getting promoted. I'm not getting well, actually, let's have people who know me, I'm like straight talking. I'm thinking, well, what the hell have you achieved? You can't just expect people to give you a promotion when what have you actually done that makes you think you're credible, for it? What do your outcomes show? So you've got to be really honest with yourself as well, and it's not just about how long you've been there, it's about what difference you've made to children's lives. But I could talk to you forever.
What's the top tip? But I think you summarized that amazingly. What's standing out? Know your worth. Know your worth and advocate for yourself. I think, honestly, to you, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, and I've made loads of notes myself about things I'm going to take away from this session. So just a huge, huge thank you for your time. I will share your LinkedIn details, and they're posted on the WomenEd. So, if anyone wants to get in touch, or talk to any of us, we're available. G's also available to speak to anybody. So just a huge thank you. You've most certainly inspired me, and I can see from the chat you've inspired lots of other people. So I think there's a quote, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like, when you shine in your trueness and your truth and your light, you allow others to do the same. And I think you've definitely done that today. Just your journey, your message is really powerful. So just thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, honestly. And it came to a point where leadership actually stopped being about me. And it was a moment I realized as to who was watching, the young people, the other leaders, the other people who are aspiring, I was modeling to them to show what is possible. So it became less about me, and it was about those other, Muslim, Asian, ethnic minority, female leaders, just watching and observing how I was navigating those rooms, how I was, navigating challenges, and how I was carrying myself with dignity in the face of adversity, and making sure that we're, elbowing our way through so that the people can come up behind you and all the spectacular women that we have to advocate for. So, that's how, I now sort of like see my role.
Exactly that. And I think we do stand that, even whichever level you are, whichever layer of leadership, class teacher, all the way up to the top, you represent. And I think we all do. So thank you to everyone for joining us today, and a huge thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.